I had a routine that hadn't changed in 30 years. Every morning, I woke up at 6, made a pot of coffee, dark roast, 2 cups, no sugar, sat at the kitchen table, and watched the sun come up over the backyard. It was the one part of my day that belonged entirely to me. Quiet. Predictable. Safe. That changed the morning my daughter-in-law left for what she called a girls' trip to Scottsdale. She'd been planning it for weeks, talking about it at dinner, leaving her suitcase open in the hallway, as if reminding us all she was going somewhere and we weren't. My son Thomas helped her load the car. I stood on the porch with my coffee and watched. She gave him a long hug, waved at me, one of those waves that's really just a formality, and drove off. Thomas came back inside. He poured himself a cup of coffee and sat down across from me at the kitchen table. That was unusual. Normally, he went straight upstairs to shower before work. He didn't say anything for a minute, just looked down at his mug. Then he said, "Dad, there's something I need to show you." I should back up. I'm 64 years old. I retired early from my job as a civil engineer after a mild heart episode 3 years ago. Nothing catastrophic, the doctors said, just a warning. My wife Carol passed 8 years before that. Breast cancer. Thomas was the one who held things together when she got sick, and he was the one who held me together when she was gone. He was 29 at the time. He shouldn't have had to carry that much, but he did it without complaint. After I retired, Thomas asked me to move in with them. He and his wife Natasha had a house in Naperville, Illinois, a 4-bedroom place with more room than 2 people needed. I told him I didn't want to impose. He said, "Dad, you're not imposing. We have a whole separate entrance." And eventually I agreed, because the truth was I didn't love the idea of being alone in our old house in Dayton with all of Carol's things still on the shelves. Natasha and I were never close. She was polite to me, the way people are polite to someone they feel obligated to tolerate. She called me by my name, which was fine, but there was always a distance. I assumed it was just personality. Some people aren't warm. I didn't hold it against her. What I didn't know, what I had no idea about for nearly 2 years, was that distance had a purpose. "Dad, there's something I need to show you." He slid his laptop across the table. On the screen was a PDF. It looked like a legal document. Dense text, 2 columns, a signature line at the bottom. I put on my reading glasses. It was a power of attorney. My name was on it as the principal. Natasha's name was on it as the agent. It was dated 14 months ago. I looked up at Thomas. "I've never seen this before," I said. "I know," he said. "That's the problem." He told me he'd found it 2 weeks earlier, in a folder Natasha kept in the filing cabinet in their home office. He hadn't been snooping. He'd been looking for the car insurance renewal. The folder was labeled House. He opened it, expecting to find property tax records, and instead found a stack of documents he didn't recognize. He hadn't told me right away because he wanted to understand what he was looking at before he said anything. He'd spent the past 2 weeks reading through every page and making phone calls to a friend who worked in estate law, to the county recorder's office, to our bank. What he found was this. 14 months ago, someone signed my name on a durable power of attorney granting Natasha full legal authority over my financial affairs. The document had been notarized. With that document, she had opened a joint brokerage account in both our names, my name first, and over the course of 11 months had moved $214,000 out of my retirement accounts and into that brokerage account, then into a personal account that was hers alone, $214,000. I had to read that number twice. I'm not a wealthy man. When Carol died, I had about $380,000 in my 401k and an IRA. I had been careful with it, disciplined, the way my father taught me to be. That money was supposed to carry me through the rest of my life. It was also the inheritance I planned to leave Thomas. More than half of it was gone. I sat at that kitchen table for a long time without speaking. Thomas put his hand on my wrist and said, "Dad, I'm so sorry. I should have caught this sooner." I shook my head. "This isn't on you," I said. "This is not on you." But even as I said it, part of me was already wondering how I had missed it. I checked my accounts. Not every month. Maybe every few months. I had moved things around after the heart episode simplified. I trusted the system. I trusted the people in my house. I had not trusted carefully enough. The first thing Thomas did, Once I'd had a few hours to absorb what I was looking at, was call his attorney friend, a man named Phil who did estate and probate work out of a firm in downtown Chicago. Phil told us over a speakerphone call that evening that the situation was serious but not irreversible. If the signature on the power of attorney was forged, and there were ways to prove that, we had grounds for financial elder abuse, which in Illinois carried both civil and criminal penalties. He recommended we do nothing to alert Natasha, contact Adult Protective Services and an elder law attorney immediately, and preserve every document we could find. Don't move money. Don't change passwords. Don't tip your hand, Phil said. The moment she knows you know, things could disappear fast. Thomas and I looked at each other across the table. How long does she usually stay on these trips? Phil asked. 5 days, Thomas said. Then you have 5 days. Let's move. What followed was the strangest week of my life. On the surface, nothing changed. The coffee was still on at 6. I still sat at the kitchen table. When Natasha texted Thomas photos from a resort pool, he texted back a smiling emoji and, "Looks amazing, babe." I listened to him do it, and felt something cold settle into my chest. Not anger exactly, more like grief, because whatever this marriage was, it was over. He knew it. He just wasn't ready to say it yet. Meanwhile, we were working. Phil connected us with an elder law attorney named Sandra who had handled financial abuse cases for 20 years. She was sharp and direct and didn't waste words. She told us the power of attorney document had 2 problems. First, the notary seal was from a notary whose license had been expired for 6 months at the time of signing. Second, I had never undergone a cognitive evaluation, which for a durable power of attorney of this type, executed by someone of my age and medical history, was not legally required but was standard practice for any legitimate attorney drafting such a document. No legitimate attorney had drafted this one. Where did the notarization happen? Sandra asked. Thomas pulled up the document. It says a UPS store location in Schaumburg. Sandra made a note. We'll pull their records. We also contacted our bank's fraud department. A specialist there walked us through the transaction history. Every transfer, every withdrawal, every account that money had touched. It was meticulous and awful, like watching a slow leak traced back to a deliberate puncture. The transfers had been made in amounts just under $10,000, spaced out over months, clearly designed to avoid triggering automatic reporting thresholds. Whoever helped Natasha set this up knew what they were doing. Has she ever mentioned a financial advisor? Sandra asked. I thought about it. She mentioned someone once, a friend of her brother's. Said he was good with money. Sandra wrote that down too. By day 3, we had a file. We had the forged power of attorney. We had 11 months of fraudulent transfer records. We had a sworn statement from the UPS store manager that no one matching my description had ever come in to sign documents, and that the notary whose seal was on the form had surrendered her license months before the signing date. We had my actual signature from 3 different official documents, which a handwriting analyst Sandra retained confirmed was inconsistent with the signature on the power of attorney. We had enough. On day 4, Sandra filed a report with the Illinois Department on Aging's Adult Protective Services Unit and the Cook County State's Attorney's Office. She also filed a civil suit to freeze the brokerage account and the personal account Natasha controlled and to begin recovery of the transferred funds. That evening, Thomas sat across from me again at the kitchen table. He looked exhausted in a way I hadn't seen since the weeks after his mother died. She's coming home tomorrow, he said. I nodded. What do you want to do? He asked. I thought about that for a moment. Thought about Carol, who would have known in 5 minutes that something was wrong with this woman. Thought about all the mornings I'd sat at this table trying to be gracious and unobtrusive, trying not to be a burden, trying to shrink myself small enough to fit comfortably into someone else's life. I want to sit right here, I said, and I want to drink my coffee. Natasha came home the next afternoon, a Saturday. She came through the garage door with her suitcase, a tan she hadn't left with, and a Scottsdale gift shop bag that had a cactus on it. She dropped her bag in the hallway, the same spot she always left things for someone else to deal with, and called out, I'm home! Thomas came downstairs. I stayed at the kitchen table. She came into the kitchen, saw me sitting there, and smiled. Hey, you, she said. How are things while I was gone? Quiet, I said. You know how it is. She poured herself a glass of water and leaned against the counter and started telling us about the resort, about a spa treatment, about a restaurant where they'd had the best margaritas. I watched her talk and I thought, she has no idea. She came home completely relaxed. That told me everything I needed to know about her conscience. Thomas said, "Tasha, can you come sit down?" She looked at him. Something in his voice must have landed differently, because her expression shifted, just slightly, just for a second, before she recovered. "Sure," she said. "What's up?" She sat down at the table. Thomas put the folder in front of her. She looked at it. She didn't open it. "What is this?" she said. "Open it," Thomas said. She opened it. I watched her face as she looked at the first page. Her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Her eyes moved quickly, scanning, calculating. Then she looked up and said, "I can explain this." And Thomas said very quietly, "I don't think you can." She tried anyway. The explanation shifted 3 times in 20 minutes. First it was, she had been trying to protect my assets. She was worried about my memory lapses. She thought a power of attorney was a reasonable precaution and she'd meant to tell me, but hadn't found the right moment. Then it was, the money transfers were for investments. It was all going to come back. She had documentation somewhere. Then it was, Thomas had never understood finances. He was misinterpreting everything. This was nothing. Thomas didn't argue with any of it. He just kept sliding documents across the table. The expired notary license. The handwriting analysis. The handwriting analysis. The transaction records. The APS report number. When she saw that last one, she went quiet. "There's a court order freezing the accounts," Thomas said. "Sandra, our attorney, filed it yesterday." Natasha sat back in her chair. For the first time in the 5 minutes since she'd sat down, she looked at me directly. I don't know what she was looking for. Sympathy, maybe. Some sign that I would soften this, intervene, make it easier. I looked back at her and said nothing. "You should call a lawyer," Thomas told her, today. She called her mother instead. I know because I heard it. Not intentionally, but the walls in that house were thinner than people realized. And she was not quiet. There was crying. There was shouting. At one point in a language I didn't understand. Then more crying. Thomas came and found me in my room. He sat on the edge of the bed, the way he used to when he was a teenager, and had something hard to say. "Dad," he said, "I'm sorry you're in the middle of this." "I'm not in the middle of it," I said. "You put me at the center of it, where I belong. That's different." He looked at me for a moment, and then he laughed. A short, surprised laugh. The kind that comes out when something lands unexpectedly true. "Yeah," he said. "Yeah, okay." The legal process took 11 months. Natasha had, in fact, worked with someone, her brother's friend, a self-described wealth management consultant who was not registered with FINRA, had no legitimate credentials, and had 2 prior civil judgments against him in different states for similar schemes. They had apparently targeted me, or rather, targeted my son's household, knowing I lived there with retirement savings, deliberately. The notary had been paid $400 to use her expired credentials, not knowing or not caring that they'd been surrendered. The criminal charges were financial exploitation of an elderly person, forgery, and elder financial abuse under Illinois law. Natasha pled guilty to a reduced charge and received 2 years of probation, mandatory restitution, and a civil judgment. Her co-conspirator, the consultant, was charged federally for running the same scheme in 3 states and received a prison sentence. Of the $214,000, I recovered $178,000. The remainder had been spent on things that couldn't be recovered. Travel, luxury goods, cash withdrawals. It wasn't everything, but it was most of it. Thomas filed for divorce the same week Natasha entered her plea. He told me afterward that filing felt less like an ending than like setting down something he'd been carrying for too long. "Did you know?" I asked him. "Before you found the folder, did you have any sense?" He was quiet for a moment. "I knew something was wrong," he said. "I just didn't know what I was allowed to see." I've thought about that a lot since then. The things we don't let ourselves look at directly because looking would require us to act on what we find. Thomas wasn't weak for not looking sooner. He was human. We all do that. We hold our eyes slightly to the side of the thing we're afraid of. What matters is that when he found the folder, he didn't close it. We moved out of that house in Naperville 8 months after Natasha left. Thomas bought a smaller place in Elmhurst, closer to his office. A two-story colonial with a separate suite above the garage that he'd spent 2 weekends helping me set up exactly the way I wanted. On the first morning in the new house, I came down at 6 o'clock. Thomas was already in the kitchen. He'd made coffee, dark roast, the way I like it, and set out 2 mugs without being asked. We sat at the table by the window and watched the sun come up. Neither of us said anything for a while, and that was fine. It was one of those silences that doesn't need filling. Eventually I said, "You know your mother would have had strong opinions about all of this." Thomas smiled. "She would have had strong opinions about Natasha on day 1. "She did," I said. "She just wasn't here to say them out loud." He looked at me. "She told you?" "She wrote me a letter," I said. Right before she passed. Said she had a feeling about things and wanted me to trust my gut and look after you if it ever came to it." I paused. I kept it in my sock drawer for 8 years and forgot it was there until I packed up the old house. Thomas was quiet for a moment. "What did you do with it?" he finally asked. "Framed it," I said. "It's on the wall in my room if you want to read it." He didn't say anything, but he nodded, and I could see him working to keep his face neutral, the way he always did when something hit him harder than he expected. We sat there a while longer. The coffee was good. The sun kept coming up. Some mornings, that's enough. And after everything, the documents, the courtrooms, the long months of waiting for something that looked like justice, I had learned not to take those mornings for granted. I had learned that the people worth holding on to will find the folder. They will sit down across from you at the kitchen table and slide it over and say, "Dad, there's something I need to show you." And they will not look away. I've had a lot of time to think about what happened. Not just the legal part. The 11 months of documents and court dates and phone calls from Sandra's office. But the part that came before all of that, the years when I sat at that kitchen table and told myself everything was fine because I needed it to be fine. That's the thing nobody tells you about getting older. You start to believe that the people around you have earned a kind of default trust. You've raised your son, buried your wife, built a life that took decades to assemble. And somewhere in that long arc of time, you stop checking. Not because you're careless. Because you're tired. And because trust feels like the reward for surviving hard things. Natasha understood that. She counted on it. What I've come to understand, and I don't say this lightly because it took me a long time to get here without bitterness, is that the choices people make have a weight to them that doesn't disappear just because time passes. Every decision Natasha made, from the first forged signature to the last transfer, accumulated. Not in some abstract moral ledger, but in the real and practical world, in court records, in bank statements, in the look on a judge's face when the evidence was laid out. She made those choices believing she was being clever. What she was actually doing was building the case against herself, one transaction at a time. I don't think that's fate. I think that's just how things work when you build something on a lie. The structure can hold for a while. It can even look solid from the outside. But it's always load-bearing in the wrong places, and eventually something small shifts and the whole thing comes down. Thomas found that folder because he was looking for car insurance paperwork. That's it. Not because he was suspicious. Not because he had some instinct. Because he'll open the wrong drawer on an ordinary Tuesday, and when he found what was inside, he didn't close it and walk away. He sat with it for 2 weeks. He made phone calls. He talked to Phil. He did the slow, unglamorous work of understanding what he was looking at before he brought it to me. That's what I mean when I talk about intelligence as something you practice, not something you're born with. Thomas wasn't fearless. I could see how much it cost him. Every smiling emoji he sent her while we were building that file, every dinner he sat through knowing what he knew. But he kept thinking clearly when it would have been easier to panic or deny. He chose precision over reaction, and that precision is what got us most of the money back. I think about Carol's letter sometimes, the one I found in my sock drawer after 8 years. She'd written it in the last weeks when she still had enough energy to hold a pen. And what she said was simple. Trust your gut. Look after Thomas, and don't let the hard things make you hard. I didn't follow all of that perfectly. There were months during the legal process when I felt something close to cold in my chest that I didn't love in myself. But I kept coming back to that last part. Don't let the hard things make you hard. That's the only version of strength worth having as far as I can tell. not the kind that closes off and stops trusting anyone. The kind that stays open, stays honest, and keeps showing up at the kitchen table at 6 in the morning because the sun is still coming up and someone you love made the coffee. And some mornings after everything, that is genuinely enough.